They say mercy is a weakness in war. The Vakrii taught me that on my first day in the Corps. They burned it into our heads during basic and during deployment, during every godforsaken battle from the outer rings to the Corpswood front. No prisoners, no hesitation, no mercy. And I believed them. I believed every word until the night I found her bleeding out in a bombed-out station on Tertius 9, clutching a data slate that could have ended the war. And I made the worst decision of my military career. I let her live. That Raevan spy, that enemy operative who should have died in that rubble, became the only reason I'm still breathing today. Her name was Kesara, and this is how a single act of misplaced compassion turned into the most dangerous partnership the Coalition ever saw. The war had been grinding us down for 6 years when I deployed to the Tertius system. 6 years of humans clawing for every inch of space against the Vakrii Dominion and their client species. The Raevens were the worst of them, not because they were the strongest or the most brutal, but because they were invisible. Infiltrators, spies. They looked almost human if you didn't look too close. Pale blue skin that could pass for a trick of the light. Eyes just a fraction too large. Fingers that bent at one extra joint. They'd been sabotaging our fleets, stealing our intel and walking among us like ghosts. We'd lost 3 entire battle groups to intelligence leaks before command even confirmed the Ravens were real and not just paranoid rumors. I was a sergeant then, leading a 12-man reconnaissance unit attached to the 47th Marine Expeditionary Force. My job was simple: boots on the ground, eyes on the enemy, and reports back to Fleet Command. We weren't glory boys. We weren't heroes. We were the ones who walked into dead stations and hostile settlements to figure out what the hell was happening before the real Marines showed up with orbital fire. It was dirty work, the kind that left you wondering if the COs back on the carrier even remembered your name. Tertius 9 had been a mining hub before the Vakrii moved in. 60,000 souls. Mostly human contractors and a handful of alien labor from the neutral zones. When we lost contact 3 weeks prior, Fleet Command sent in a frigate to investigate. The frigate never reported back. So they sent us 12 Marines in a drop pod with 48 hours of air, a week of rations, and orders to confirm the enemy presence or die trying. The station was a graveyard. The moment we breached the outer docking ring, I knew we were walking into a massacre. Bodies everywhere. Humans, mostly. Civilians. Families. The Vakrii hadn't just taken the station, they'd made an example of it. Burn marks scored the walls. Atmosphere had vented in at least 3 sections. The emergency lighting flickered in that sickly yellow that made every shadow feel like it was crawling. My HUD showed trace radiation, biological contaminants, and a dozen other things that meant the place was a death trap, even if we didn't run into hostiles. We moved in standard sweep formation, Ramirez on point with the scanner rig, Decker and Okoye covering the flanks. I took center with Corporal Hayes, our comm specialist. The rest of the unit spread out in overlapping fields of fire. We'd done this 100 times before. Clear the room, tag the bodies, move on. It was mechanical, clinical. You couldn't let yourself feel anything or you'd go insane. But Tertius 9 was different. The bodies weren't just dead, they'd been arranged. Families grouped together in the corridors, children holding their parents on hands, old men and women seated against the walls like they were waiting for a transport that would never come. It wasn't combat. It was theater. The Vakrii wanted us to see this, wanted us to know what they could do, wanted us to understand that we were insects to them, pests to be exterminated. Ramirez spotted the first Vakrii defensive position in the central hub. 3 automated turrets and a hardened bunker carved into the station's superstructure. We pulled back, called in the coordinates, and waited for the Navy to slag it from orbit. That was doctrine. Don't engage fortified positions. Mark and move. Let the big guns do the heavy lifting. But Hayes picked up something strange on the long-range scan. A power signature deeper in the station. Active systems in a section that should have been dead. Command wanted eyes on it before they committed firepower. So we went in, down through the maintenance shafts and utility corridors where the turrets couldn't track us. The station's guts were a maze of pipes, cables, and crawl spaces barely wide enough for a man in combat armor. The air stank of coolant and decay. My rifle's optics painted the world in shades of green and gray. Every step echoed, every breath fogged my visor. I kept thinking about the families in the corridors. Kept wondering if any of them had tried to hide down here when the Vakrii came. If they died in the dark, alone, while the enemy walked past overhead. We found the source of the power signature in a server room 3 levels below the main hab ring. The servers were still active, jury-rigged to an emergency generator that was running on fumes. Someone had been using them recently. The terminals were warm. Data packets still cycling through the local network. Ramirez pulled the logs while Decker and Okoye secured the entrance. That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A wet, rasping breath from the back corner of the room, behind a pile of collapsed ceiling panels and shattered equipment. I brought my rifle up, finger on the trigger, and moved toward the sound. The rest of the unit fanned out, covering every angle. My helmet's lamp cut through the darkness, and I saw her. A Raevan. Female, I guessed, though their biology was different enough that it was hard to tell. She was slumped against the wall, one hand pressed against her side where dark purple blood seeped through her fingers. The other hand clutched a data slate so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her eyes met mine, and I saw something I didn't expect. Fear. Not the fear of a soldier facing death that I'd seen 1,000 times. This was different. Raw. Animal. The kind of fear that strips away everything else and leaves only the desperate will to survive. She didn't reach for a weapon, didn't try to activate a distress beacon or trigger a trap. She just stared at me with those 2 large eyes and waited for me to pull the trigger. Protocol was clear. Vakrii collaborators were to be neutralized on sight, Raevens especially. They were intelligence assets, security risks. Every second she stayed alive was another second she could transmit data, call for backup, or activate some failsafe that would kill us all. I should have shot her, should have put 2 round center mass and moved on. That's what I was trained to do. That's what the war demanded. But I didn't. I lowered my rifle. "Hayes," I said quietly, "get the medkit." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the rest of the unit staring at me through their visors. Ramirez actually took a step back, like I'd grown a second head. Decker started to say something, then thought better of it. Only Hayes moved, pulling the medical kit from his pack, and kneeling beside the Raevan without a word. He was a good Marine, followed orders even when they didn't make sense. "Sarge," Okoye said carefully, "now that's a Raevan. I can see that. We have orders. I know the orders, Corporal." "Then why?" "Because she's wounded and unarmed." I looked at the data slate still clutched in her hand, and because I want to know what's on that device. It was a lie. I didn't give a damn about the device right then. I just couldn't pull the trigger. Couldn't add one more body to the pile. Couldn't be the kind of man who killed a bleeding enemy without even asking why. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the sight of all those dead families. Maybe I was just tired of being part of the machine that ground people into nothing. Whatever it was, I made my choice. And in that moment, everything changed. Hayes worked quickly, sealing the wound with biofoam and hitting her with a stimulant to keep her conscious. Raevan biology was close enough to human that our field medicine worked, though Hayes had to adjust the dosage twice before her vitals stabilized. She didn't fight him, didn't say a word, just watched me with those alien eyes while her blood pooled on the deck beneath her. When Hayes finished, I crouched down in front of her. Up close, the differences were more obvious. Her skin had a faint luminescence in the dark, like bioluminescent algae. Her pupils were elliptical, more like a cat's than a human's, and her scent was wrong, not unpleasant, but distinctly alien. Something chemical and sharp that made my instincts scream danger, even though she was barely conscious. "My name is Sergeant Cain," I said slowly. "Do you understand me?" She nodded, a very human gesture. "What's your name?" She hesitated, then whispered something in a language I didn't recognize. Hayes's translator rig clicked and hummed, then displayed text on my HUD. "Kesara." "Kesara," I repeated. "What were you doing here?" She swallowed hard, then spoke again. The translator converted her words in real time. "Extracting data before your fleet destroys everything." "What kind of data?" "Proof." Her voice was barely audible. "Proof of what they did here, what the Vakrii did." I glanced at Ramirez. He was still pulling files from the main servers, but his expression inside his helmet told me he'd heard. "Sarge," he said quietly, "she's telling the truth. These files, Jesus Christ, they're execution orders, civilian purge protocols. The Vakrii didn't just take this station, they systematically murdered everyone, men, women, children. They catalogued it, recorded it, like it was a goddamn inventory report." My stomach turned. I looked back at Kesara. And why would a Raevan spy care about human casualties? Because... She coughed, and more purple blood flecked her lips. "Because we didn't know. The Dominion told us this was a military target, told us humans were the aggressors, told us..." Her eyes closed. "They lied to all of us. And when I found out, when I tried to report it, they tried to kill me too." The pieces started falling into place. The isolated power signature, the emergency generator, the wounds that looked like weapons fire from Vakrii pulse rifles. She hadn't been hiding from us. She'd been hiding from them. "You're a defector," I said. "I'm a dead woman," she corrected. "If you leave me here, if the Dominion finds me, if my own people learn what I know..." She opened her eyes and looked at me with something like hope. "But if you take me with you, I can help. I know their networks, their codes, their safe houses and supply lines. I can give you everything." It was a trap. Had to be. No way a Raevan spy just flipped sides because she saw a massacre. They were trained for this, trained to gain trust, extract intel, and disappear. Every instinct I had screamed not to trust her. But I looked at those files on Ramirez's scanner, looked at the blood on the floor, looked at the fear in her eyes that seemed too real to be faked, and I made my second terrible decision of the day. "Get her up," I told Hayes. "She's coming with us." Decker actually raised his rifle at that. "Sarge, this is insane." "Noted. Now lower your weapon, Marine. We can't bring an enemy combatant back to the ship. Command will debrief her, then they'll decide what to do." I stood, slinging my rifle. "We have our orders. Assess enemy presence and extract. Well, we're extracting an intelligence asset. That's well within mission parameters. That's a hell of a stretch, Sarge. Then I'll put it in my report. But right now, we need to move. This station's dead. The Vakrii know we're here, and I'd rather not wait around for their friends to show up." No one argued after that. They knew better. We got Kesara on her feet, supported between Hayes and Okoye. Ramirez grabbed the data slate and every file he could pull from the servers. Then we moved, fast and quiet, back through the maintenance shafts toward our extraction point. The whole time, I kept waiting for Kesara to activate some hidden weapon or call in an ambush. Kept waiting for my decision to blow up in my face and get us all killed, but it never happened. She just limped along between my Marines, clutching her wounded side, saying nothing. When we reached the docking ring, our dropship was already inbound. The pilot saw Kesara and nearly aborted the pickup until I threatened to file an insubordination report. We loaded in, strapped down, and burned hard for the fleet. The ride back was silent. My unit wouldn't look at me. Kesara sat in the crash seat with her head down, purple blood still seeping through Hayes' field dressing. And I sat there wondering if I'd just committed treason or saved us all. I didn't know it then, but that decision on Tertius 9 would ripple outward. It would start a chain of events that would change the entire war, because Kesara wasn't just any spy. She was a high-level intelligence operative with access to the Dominion's most closely guarded secrets. And when she decided to trust me back, when she chose to become something more than an enemy asset, she became the most dangerous weapon humanity ever wielded. Fleet Command wanted my head on a spike. The moment we docked with the carrier Valiant Dawn, I was escorted under armed guard to the brig. Not arrested, technically, just detained pending review, which was military speak for, "We haven't decided if you're a traitor yet." Kesara was taken to medical, then to a secure holding cell 3 decks below, where naval intelligence could work her over. I didn't see her for 4 days. 4 days of sitting in a grey box, answering the same questions over and over, while officers with more brass than field time tried to figure out if I'd lost my mind or compromised the entire fleet. Captain Voss ran the debriefing personally. He was old corps, fought in the frontier wars before the Vakrii even knew humans existed. Scar tissue ran down the left side of his face, where a plasma burst had nearly taken his head off on some forgotten moon. He sat across from me in the interrogation room, hands folded on the table, and studied me like I was a bug under glass. "You broke protocol," he said flatly. "Willfully, deliberately, with full knowledge of the consequences." "Yes, sir." "You brought an enemy intelligence operative aboard this vessel. An operative from a species that has cost us 3 battle groups and thousands of lives through infiltration and sabotage." "Yes, sir." "And you did this because—" He leaned back, eyes hard as flint. "Because she looked scared? Because you felt bad? What possible justification could you have for compromising operational security?" I'd rehearsed this 100 times in my head during those 4 days. Thought about duty, protocol, the chain of command. Thought about all the ways I could spin this to save my career. But sitting there under Voss's gaze, I realized something. I didn't care about saving face. I cared about the truth. Because she had information, sir. Information that could change how we fight this war. And because killing her would have been murder, not combat. Voss's expression didn't change. "Marines don't commit murder, Sergeant. We eliminate threats." She wasn't a threat. She was wounded, unarmed, and trying to expose Vakrii war crimes. If that makes her a threat, then we're fighting the wrong war. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush steel. Voss studied me for a long moment, then pulled up a data pad and slid it across the table. "This is the preliminary report from Naval Intelligence. They've been interrogating your Raevan friend. Want to know what they found?" I picked up the pad, already bracing for the worst. Maybe Kesara had been playing me all along. Maybe the whole thing was an elaborate trap, and I'd walked right into it like an idiot. But as I read the report, my hands started to shake. Kesara had given them everything. Access codes to Raevan intelligence networks, safe house locations across 16 systems, the names and operational profiles of every deep-cover Raevan agent embedded in Coalition space. She'd even provided the command structure of the Dominion's intelligence division, complete with internal communications, showing that the massacre on Tertius 9 wasn't an isolated incident. The Vakrii had been systematically purging civilian populations across the border zones, and the Raevans had been feeding them targeting data without knowing what it was being used for. "She didn't just flip," I said quietly. "She burned her entire network, everyone she ever worked with, her own people." "Indeed." Voss took the pad back. which means either she's the most committed defector in the history of warfare, or this is the most elaborate intelligence operation the Dominion has ever run. Intelligence is betting on the latter. They want her spaced. My stomach dropped. Sir, relax, Sergeant. I'm not here to ask your opinion on summary execution protocols. He leaned forward, his scarred face unreadable. I'm here because Admiral Cain wants to run an experiment, and you just volunteered to be the test subject. That's how I ended up as Kesara's handler. Not officially, of course. On paper, I was reassigned to a new unit under Naval Intelligence's Strategic Operations Division. Special reconnaissance with enhanced intelligence assets. In reality, I was babysitting the alien spy who'd blown up her entire life because she couldn't stomach genocide. They gave us a 2-person berth on the carrier, a secure terminal, and a list of targets that Command wanted hit with surgical precision. Our job was simple. Use Kesara's knowledge of Dominion networks to conduct deep penetration raids behind enemy lines. No backup, no support. And if we got caught, the Coalition would disavow everything. I met with Kesara in one of the carrier's secure briefing rooms a week after we'd pulled her out of Tertius 9. She looked different. They'd patched her wounds, given her clean clothes, and let her shower, but the fear in her eyes hadn't faded. If anything, it had deepened. She sat at the briefing table with her hands folded, watching the door like she expected assassins to burst through at any moment. They told you? I asked, taking the seat across from her. She nodded. That I am. What is your word? A traitor. That my people will hunt me for the rest of my life. That I can never go home. That's about right. I pulled up the mission files on my datapad. They also told you about our new assignment. Yes. Her voice was quiet, carefully controlled. You and I, working together, finding Dominion targets, killing them. That's the job. And if I refuse, then they'll probably space you like intelligence wanted. I met her eyes, but I don't think you'll refuse. Why? Because you didn't go through all this just to die in a cell. You want payback for what they made you do, for what they made you complicit in. I leaned back. Am I wrong? For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she reached up and touched the side of her head where the Raevan equivalent of an ear would be. My people have a saying, Keshin Tavar Nemra. It means, the truth is a blade that cuts both ways. When I learned what the Dominion was doing, what I had helped them do, she closed her eyes. I can never unknow that, can never pretend I didn't see. So yes, you are not wrong. I want payback. Good. I brought up the first target file. Then let's get to work. Our first mission was a nightmare. Intelligence wanted us to infiltrate a Dominion communications relay on the mining world of Kados 4. The relay was the hub for all Raevan spy networks in the sector, and with Kesara's codes, we could crack it wide open. The problem was getting there. Kados 4 was deep in Vakrii territory, surrounded by enemy patrol routes and sensor nets. We'd have to use a civilian transport, forged credentials, and a lot of luck to get anywhere near the relay without getting vaporized. We left the Valiant Dawn in a modified cargo hauler, just the two of us, and enough explosives to level a city block. The first 3 days were spent in hyperspace, with nothing to do but prep gear and try not to think about how many ways this could go wrong. Kesara spent most of the time at the navigation console, triple-checking our approach vector. I cleaned my weapons, reviewed the mission brief, and tried to figure out how to trust someone who, a week ago, I would have shot on sight. On the third night, she broke the silence. Why did you save me? I looked up from the rifle I was cleaning. What? On Tertius 9. You had every reason to kill me. Every right. Your orders were clear. She turned in her seat, those two large eyes fixed on me. But you didn't. Why? I thought about lying. Thought about giving her some tactical justification or claiming I'd seen intelligence value in keeping her alive. But we were about to walk into the mouth of hell together, and if we didn't have honesty, we had nothing. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe because I'm tired of killing, maybe because you looked more scared than dangerous, or maybe I just couldn't add one more body to that station. I set the rifle down. Does it matter? Yes. She stood and crossed to where I sat, moving with that strange grace Raevens had, because mercy is not a Vakrii trait, not a Raevan one either. We are taught that weakness invites destruction, that compassion is a vulnerability to be exploited. But you... She tilted her head, studying me. You showed mercy when it served no purpose, when it endangered you. That is not weakness. That is something else. Something I don't have a word for in my language. We call it humanity, I said. And trust me, it gets people killed just as often as it saves them. Perhaps. She was quiet for a moment, then added softly, but it saved me, and I will not forget that debt. Kados 4 was a brown smear against the void, scarred by centuries of strip mining and industrial abuse. We dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, broadcasting civilian transponder codes and a cover story about being independent ore haulers looking for work. The Vakrii patrols barely glanced at us, with Kesara's credentials spoofing our identity. We looked like just another desperate human ship trying to scratch out a living in the occupied zones. We landed at a mining settlement on the planet's equator, a sprawling mess of prefab structures and industrial equipment that housed about 5,000 souls, humans, mostly, with a scattering of other species who'd sided with the Dominion or just wanted to survive. The communications relay was in the hills 3 kilometers north, disguised as a civilian weather monitoring station. Security was light on the outside, heavy on the inside. And if we tripped the wrong alarm, we'd have Vakrii response teams on us in minutes. We went in at midnight, dressed in civilian clothes and carrying tools that could pass for mining equipment. Kesara had dyed her skin with a chemical compound that made her look almost human in the dark. Not perfect, but good enough to pass a cursory inspection. We moved through the settlement's outskirts, following maintenance paths and blind spots in the security coverage. Kesara knew the patrol patterns by heart, knew where the cameras were, knew which guards were diligent and which ones were lazy. "You've done this before," I whispered as we crouched behind a storage tank, waiting for a patrol to pass. "Many times," she replied. "I was a ghost before I became a traitor. And now?" She glanced at me, and in the dim light of the settlement's industrial floods, I saw something that might have been a smile. Now I am something worse. A ghost with a conscience. We reached the relay station without incident. The exterior looked exactly like what it was supposed to be, a boring piece of infrastructure maintained by bored technicians. But when Kesara interfaced with the access panel, her expression darkened. "What?" I asked. "They've upgraded security since I defected, new encryption protocols, biometric locks I don't have clearance for." She worked the panel for another few seconds, then pulled back. "And I can crack it, but it will take time, and it will trigger a silent alarm." "How much time?" 10 minutes, maybe 15. "And how long before that alarm brings company?" 20 minutes, if we're lucky. I did the math. It was tight, too tight. But we hadn't come all this way to turn back now. "Do it," I said. "I'll watch the perimeter." Kesara went to work, her long fingers dancing across the panel with practiced precision. I took up position at the corner of the building, rifle in hand, watching the settlement below for any sign of movement. The minutes crawled by like hours. Every shadow looked like an enemy, every sound like incoming fire. My nerves were wound so tight I nearly shot a maintenance drone that floated past on its routine patrol. Then, 8 minutes in, Kesara hissed, "Contact. 3 patrol vehicles incoming from the main garrison. They know we're here." "How much longer?" 2 minutes. Maybe 3. We don't have 3 minutes. Then we don't get the data. She didn't look up from her work. Your choice, Sergeant. I could see the vehicles now, their lights cutting through the darkness as they raced toward our position. 3 troop carriers, probably 6 Vakrii per vehicle, armed with pulse rifles and bad attitudes. We could run, leave the explosives, abandon the mission, and try to reach our ship before they locked down the settlement. It was the smart play, the safe play. But if we ran, we'd get nothing. No intelligence, no tactical advantage. Just another failed mission to add to the growing list of why this war was grinding us into dust. Finish the download, I said, bringing my rifle up. I'll buy you the time. They will kill you. Then you better work fast. I moved to a defensive position at the relay station's entrance, using the doorframe for cover. The patrol vehicles were closing fast, maybe 30 seconds out. I set my rifle to burst fire, activated my helmet's targeting system, and waited. My heart was hammering, my hands were steady, and somewhere in the back of my mind a voice was screaming that this was suicide. The first vehicle skidded to a halt 20 meters away. Vakrii troops poured out, 4-legged insectoid nightmares in powered armor. They moved with that unnatural speed that made them such terrifying combatants, scuttling toward the relay station in a coordinated assault pattern. I waited until they were in optimal range, then opened fire. The first burst caught the lead Vakrii in the center mass, punching through its armor and dropping it like a puppet with cut strings. The others scattered, returning fire with their plasma weapons. Bolts of superheated energy slammed into the doorframe, melting metal and filling the air with acrid smoke. I ducked back, adjusted my aim, and took out another 2 before they reached cover. The second and third vehicles were deploying now, more Vakrii, more firepower. I was outnumbered 12-1, with no backup and no escape route. This was exactly the kind of fight Command trained us never to take. But I'd made my choice back on Tertius 9, and I was going to live with the consequences or die with them. I burned through half my ammunition in the first minute, dropping 4 more Vakrii and forcing the rest to take cover. But they were coordinating now, flanking my position, using suppression fire to pin me down while others advanced. I was good, but I wasn't that good. Another 30 seconds and they'd overrun me. Then Kesara's voice came through my helmet comm. Data extracted. Setting charges now. 10 seconds. The Vakrii were closing in, plasma bolts turning the relay station's entrance into molten slag. I could hear their chittering battle language, could smell the ozone from their weapons. One of them rounded the corner, mandibles spread wide, weapon raised, and then the world exploded. Kesara had rigged the relay station's power core to overload. The blast took out the entire building and everything within 20 meters. I was thrown backward, my armor's shields absorbing most of the impact, but leaving me deaf and half-blind. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left of the relay station but a crater. No Vakrii, no data, just burning wreckage and the sound of alarms echoing across the settlement. Kesara hauled me to my feet, her face streaked with soot and blood. Move, more will come. We ran. Through the settlement, through the chaos of civilians scrambling for shelter, through the security checkpoints that were too focused on the explosion to stop 2 fleeing figures in the darkness. We reached our ship, fired up the engines, and burned for orbit with half the Vakrii garrison screaming for our blood. We made it. Barely. And as we jumped to hyperspace with enemy fighters seconds behind us, I looked over at Kesara and saw her laughing. Actually laughing. A sound that was part relief, part madness, and entirely too human. That was insane, she said. Yeah, I agreed, checking our systems for damage. Welcome to working with humans. We specialize in insane. She smiled then, a real smile. And for the first time since Tertius 9, I thought maybe, just maybe, this partnership might actually work. Over the next 6 months, Kesara and I ran 14 more operations. each one deeper into Dominion territory, each one more dangerous than the last. We hit supply depots, sabotaged fleet coordination centers, and assassinated 3 high-ranking Vakrii intelligence officers who'd been orchestrating the civilian purges. The intelligence we extracted turned the war around in the Coalition's favor. Suddenly we knew where the Dominion would strike before they did, knew their supply lines, their troop movements, their strategic priorities. It was like fighting with our eyes open for the first time in 6 years. But success came at a cost. The Vakrii put a bounty on our heads, 2 million credits, dead or alive. The Raevens made it personal. They sent kill teams, assassins, former colleagues of Kesara's who'd been ordered to bring back her head as proof of loyalty. We survived, but barely. Every mission felt like we were one step ahead of oblivion, and I could see it wearing on Kesara. The nightmares, the way she'd flinch at shadows, the 1,000-yard stare when she thought I wasn't looking. One night, after a particularly brutal extraction from a Dominion prison facility, I found her in our berth's tiny common area, staring at a data pad. Her hands were shaking. "What's wrong?" I asked. She didn't answer at first, just turned the pad toward me. It was a list, names, dozens of them, all Raevens, all dead. "Former contacts," she said quietly. "Friends, people I worked with. The Dominion is executing them. Every Raevan who ever had contact with me, even tangentially. They're calling it a purge of compromised assets. But..." Her voice broke. "They're dying because of me. Because I chose this." I sat down beside her, unsure what to say. How do you comfort someone whose entire species has marked her for death? Someone whose existence has become a death sentence for everyone she ever knew? "Oh, they're dying because the Dominion is run by monsters," I said finally. "Not because of you." "That distinction doesn't resurrect them." She set the pad down. "Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. If maybe it would have been better to die on Tertius 9, to not know, to not carry this weight. But you did know, and you couldn't unknow it. That's the thing about the truth. Once you see it, you can't go back." She looked at me then, and I saw tears tracking down her face. I'd never seen a Raevan cry before, didn't even know they could. How do you live with it? The weight of command, the decisions that get people killed. How do humans bear that burden? I thought about all the Marines I'd lost over the years, the ones who'd followed my orders into battles they never came back from, the families who'd never get closure, the guilt that woke me up at 3 in the morning, wondering if I could have done something different. "We don't bear it," I said honestly. "We carry it, and we share it with the people who understand, who've made the same choices, who know that sometimes there are no good options, just less terrible ones." I put a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone in this, Kesara. Not anymore." She leaned into me then, her head on my shoulder, and we sat there in silence while the ship hummed around us. 2 soldiers from opposite sides of a war, bound together by a choice made in the ruins of a dead station. It wasn't forgiveness, wasn't redemption. It was just 2 broken people trying to hold each other up long enough to finish what they'd started. The endgame came 3 months later. Naval intelligence received word that the Vakrii were planning a massive offensive against the Coalition's core worlds. A coordinated strike involving 50 capital ships and enough ground forces to overwhelm our defenses. If they succeeded, the war would be over. Humanity would be pushed back into a handful of systems, isolated and broken, waiting for the final blow. The operation was being coordinated from a command nexus deep in Dominion space, a facility so heavily fortified that conventional assault was suicide. But Kesara knew about it, had helped design some of the security protocols before her defection. And she had a plan. "It's insane," I told her when she laid it out, "even by our standards." "Yes," she agreed, "but it will work." The plan was elegant in its brutality. The Vakrii command nexus was built into an asteroid in a heavily defended system. It was protected by minefields, patrol fleets, and enough automated defenses to shred an entire battle group. Going in hard would fail. Going in quiet would take too long. But Kesara had found a third option. The facility had a weakness, a single transport lane used for supply runs, protected by older security protocols that she could spoof. If we could get a small craft inside, we could plant a specialized virus directly into the command network. The virus would corrupt their coordination systems, turning the offensive into chaos. The catch was that someone had to physically install it, and that someone would never make it out. Fleet Command approved the plan. They didn't approve us going. Too valuable as intelligence assets, they said. Too important to risk on a suicide mission. But Kesara and I had other ideas. We stole a transport, forged the launch codes, and jumped for Dominion space before anyone could stop us. The asteroid facility loomed ahead of us like a fortress made of stone and rage. We broadcasted Kesara's old credentials, spoofed a supply manifest, and held our breath as the automated system scanned us. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then the docking bay doors opened, and we were in. The facility's interior was vast, kilometers of corridors carved into solid rock, filled with Vakrii personnel and enough military hardware to conquer a dozen systems. We moved fast, using maintenance shafts and service tunnels to avoid the main thoroughfares. Kesara navigated from memory, her hands steady despite the fact that we were walking into the heart of enemy territory with no backup and no escape. We reached the central command node 40 minutes after docking. It was a massive chamber filled with holographic displays showing fleet positions, supply routes, and tactical projections. Dozens of Vakrii officers scuttled between stations, coordinating the coming offensive, and at the center of it all was the network core, a crystalline structure pulsing with data streams from across the Dominion. Kesara pulled out the virus, contained in a specialized data spike. 3 minutes to install. 2 minutes before the system notices the intrusion. 5 minutes total before this place locks down, and we're trapped. Then we better move fast. I checked my rifle. Go. I'll cover you. She ran for the network core while I took up a defensive position. For the first minute, no one noticed us. The Vakrii were too focused on their preparations, too confident in their security. But the moment Kesara jacked into the core, alarms screamed through the facility. Red emergency lights flooded the chamber, and every Vakrii in the room turned toward us with weapons raised. I opened fire, dropped 3 before they could react, but there were too many. Plasma bolts filled the air, turning the chamber into a hellscape of fire and smoke. My armor took hit after hit, shields failing, plates cracking. I was going to die here. We both were. But if Kesara could finish the upload, if the virus could buy the Coalition enough time to prepare, then maybe it would be worth it. Kesara, I shouted over the chaos. How much longer? 90 seconds. A plasma bolt hit me in the side, punching through my armor and searing into my ribs. I went down hard, vision swimming. The pain was incredible, all-consuming. But I kept firing, kept the Vakrii back through sheer stubbornness and rage. Then something unexpected happened. A voice echoed through the chamber. A human voice, amplified through the facility speakers. Coalition forces, this is Sergeant Cain. I'm inside the Dominion Command Nexus. If you're listening, you have a 5-minute window. Hit them now. Hit them with everything. It was a bluff, a desperate gamble. We had no way of knowing if Fleet Command had tracked us, no way of knowing if they were even in position. But I'd learned something during my time with Kesara. Sometimes the most effective weapon isn't firepower or tactics, it's making your enemy believe you've already won. And it worked. The Vakrii commanders panicked, started issuing contradictory orders, pulling ships back to defend the facility, scrambling their offensive before it even began. The chaos gave Kesara the time she needed. The virus uploaded. And then she pulled the data spike and ran toward me, firing a Vakrii weapon she'd picked up off the ground. "Time to go!" she shouted. "Can't!" I gasped. "Armor's compromised. Too slow!" She grabbed me, hauled me to my feet with strength I didn't know Raevens had, and half-carried me toward the exit. The Vakrii were closing in, the facility was going into lockdown, and I could feel my consciousness slipping. This was it, the end. The price for all those decisions made in station ruins and briefing rooms. But Kesara didn't stop. She dragged me through corridors, fired one-handed while supporting me with the other, and somehow got us back to our transport. We launched with plasma fire chewing through our hull, enemy fighters screaming in pursuit. But the virus was spreading through the Dominion's network like wildfire, systems failing, coordination breaking down. And in the distance, I could see the Coalition fleet dropping out of hyperspace. They'd come. They'd actually come. The fleet tore through the Dominion defenses like they were paper. Capital ships laying down fire that turned asteroids into dust. Fighters strafing supply lines and communication nodes. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And as our transport limped toward friendly lines with our engines failing and my life bleeding out onto the deck, I understood something. We'd won. Not the war, but this battle. This moment. And it was enough. I woke up 3 days later in the medical bay of the Valiant Dawn. Kesara was sitting beside my bed, reading a data pad. She looked up when my eyes opened, and I saw relief flood her face. "You're alive," she said, disappointed. I managed to croak. "Terrified." She set the pad down. "They're calling us heroes. The virus bought the Coalition the time they needed. The offensive never launched. The war isn't over, but—" She paused. "We changed it, made it winnable. That was the idea." "Yes. But I thought you would die. Thought we both would. And I realized something in that moment." She leaned forward, those alien eyes fixed on mine. "You saved my life once, and I've spent every day since trying to repay that debt. But on that facility, when I carried you out, I understood. It was never about debt. It was about choosing to save someone because they're worth saving. Because mercy isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing we can do." I reached out, took her hand. "You're my right hand, Kesara, my partner. And I trust you more than anyone I've ever served with, even though I was your enemy. Especially because of that." I smiled. "You chose to be better than what they made you. That's the most human thing I've ever seen." She smiled back, tears in her eyes again. "Then perhaps I am learning what it means to be human." The war continued for another 2 years, but Kesara and I kept fighting, kept running operations that turned the tide bit by bit. Other Raevens started defecting, inspired by her example. The Vakrii's intelligence network collapsed. And slowly, impossibly, humanity started winning. They made us legends, the human sergeant who showed mercy and the alien spy who became his sword. It's a good story, the kind they'll tell in academies and around campfires. But the truth is simpler. I made a choice in the ruins of a dead station, a choice to see a person instead of an enemy. And that choice rippled outward, changing everything. That's the thing about humans. We don't always make the smart choice. We make the right one, even when it costs us, even when it's impossible. Because mercy, compassion, and the stubborn refusal to become what we fight, that's what makes us dangerous. That's what makes us human. And sometimes, when you're lucky, it saves the galaxy.